Boldwood presents Healing Hearts at the Forever Cottage, written by Jill Steeples and read by Karen Cass. Chapter 1. The long sunny days of summer, which had cast a continuous golden glow over the honey-coloured buildings of Lower Leaping, a picturesque village in the Cotswolds, extended well into September. Tess Alexander was conscious of making the most of every single moment before the cooler weather edged in. Every morning when she opened the double French doors of the orangery onto the garden, inhaling a breath of hope and anticipation at the dawn of a new day, she smiled as Barney, her lovable beagle, brushed against her legs, eager to make it outside before her. Together they would mooch around the garden, Barney sniffing deep into the bushes for scents of any nocturnal visitors, while Tess would inspect her flowers and plants, deadheading any faded blooms. Invariably, her gaze would travel across to the annex, a teal-coloured wooden lodge that nestled amongst the trees. It had started life as a summer house before being converted into an office for her husband Charles during the pandemic, turning into something of a dumping ground later after he returned to the workplace. When Charles announced earlier this year that he was walking away from their marriage to start a new life with a younger colleague, it was one of the first jobs Tess had set her mind to. Clearing the annex of all traces of Charles, transforming it into a peaceful and calm oasis, intended as her craft room, a safe space where she could retreat from the world and focus her attentions on her crochet projects, the books she was reading, and her renewed interest in watercolour painting. Now she gave a smile as she went across to the picturesque structure and opened up the doors. What was it they say about the best-laid plans? Even before she'd put the finishing touches to the new outdoor living space, or even made use of the room, she'd had a sudden change of heart about its use when she'd met Rob, a stranger who was down on his luck and going through a similar set of circumstances to Tess, finding himself adrift and homeless after the breakdown of his marriage. She'd often wondered if fate had brought them together that day in Bramlingham when they had literally bumped into each other in a shop doorway. Certainly there must have been some alchemy at work for her to take pity on a man she knew very little about, especially when the parts she did know hadn't painted him in the best light. Still, for some reason she hadn't been able to stop thinking about him and had returned to town to track him down, surprising them both when she actually found him and offered him a place to stay in the renovated annex. In hindsight, it was probably a hugely risky thing to do, inviting a strange man with a criminal record into the sanctuary of the grounds at Hollyhocks Cottage, at a time when she was emotional and vulnerable, but something had compelled her to act in that way. An instinct based on a connection she'd immediately made to him, probably based on sensing a kindred spirit, someone experiencing the same sense of loss and betrayal that she was going through. Luckily, her instincts proved correct, and Rob moving into the annex had been a turning point for them both. Now she took a deep breath, inhaling the woody, earthy aromas from the garden, imagining she might still be able to pick out the scent of Rob's aftershave. She gave a wry smile. Although traces of Rob's scent had lingered for days after he'd vacated the annex, now all that remained, as a reminder of him once living here, was the beautiful small watercolour that he had painted, hanging on the wall. She went over to the picture, her fingers reaching up to trace around the outline of the garden at Hollyhocks, the image making her smile every time she looked at it. The soft, muted colours leapt off the canvas, and with the intricacies of the different flowers, Tess's wicker basket on the gravel pathway filled with colourful vegetables and herbs, and Barney's backside sticking out from a bush, it gave the painting a charming personal touch. Her musing was interrupted by a familiar voice ringing out. "It's only me. Are you there, Tess?" "In the annex, Dilly," she called, as she heard the back gate creak open and footsteps crunching along the gravel path. She stepped out to greet her long-time neighbour, but only recently made friend, Dilly Duchamp. "Ah, I thought I heard you pottering about. How are things?" Dilly asked, her brow furrowing in concern as she glanced towards the cottage. "How is Hannah doing?" To think that at one time Tess hadn't encouraged Dilly's friendship, taking against what she perceived to be an overbearing enthusiasm and eagerness, when in fact she was just being neighbourly. Tess often experienced a pang of regret about the way she'd treated Dilly in the past, when she'd kept her at arm's length and gently rebutted her overtures of friendship. It was a good job Dilly didn't hold a grudge, because of all the changes that had come about in Tess's life this year, one of her most valued ones had been her growing closeness to Dilly, who had proved herself to be a great support in recent months. Now she wrapped Dilly in a hug, genuinely pleased to see her. She seems to be doing okay, thanks. She's gone to work and is carrying on with life as normal. There's been lots of tears, obviously, but I think she wants to try and put it behind her and simply concentrate on the future. That's understandable. She's young, with her whole life in front of her. She'll have plenty of good times ahead. Deep down, Tess suspected it was true, but she only wished that her daughter Hannah hadn't needed to go through all that torment and upset. What had meant to be the trip of a lifetime had been cut short when an intense love affair with Billy, a charming Irish guy who she had met on her travels, had ended abruptly and painfully. Hannah had headed home early, sad and dejected, to stay with her mum and reconsider her future. Still, if there was one thing that the events of this year had taught Tess, it was that life had a habit of upending your plans when you least expected it, but it didn't mean that you couldn't come through it, stronger and more determined than ever. Tess only hoped the same would apply in Hannah's case too. Are you staying for a cuppa? Well, only if it's a good time for you, said Dilly with an expectant smile. Come on, I'll pop the kettle on. Tess had never known Dilly to refuse the offer of a drink, but then it came with the territory in her job. She was a freelance hairdresser who saw clients in their own homes or in the small salon at Lavender Cottage where she lived alone, which made her the fount of all knowledge when it came to the goings-on in the village. Anyway, I must tell you, the new people have moved into the old post office. I was walking past yesterday and happened to bump into the new owner. His name's Michael, and he's an architect, apparently. Dilly's eyes widened, clearly impressed by this snippet of information. He has an adorable black Labrador called Monty. They were both very charming and friendly. I'm not sure if Michael has a wife or partner or children. He was busy carting boxes through the front door, so I didn't like to give him the third degree. That's not like you, Dilly. I know, she said, laughing, taking Tess's comment in the manner it was intended. I must be losing my touch, but don't worry. I'll pop by again later today, drop off some of my rock buns as a welcoming gift, and find out all there is to know about our new neighbour. I'll report back as soon as I have any further information. Well, I wouldn't expect anything less. They had moved into the kitchen and were sitting at the island, enjoying the mugs of freshly brewed coffee that Tess had prepared. And what about Rob? Dilly asked. How's he doing? Good, said Tess, unable to stop the smile from spreading across her face. It was a natural enough occurrence these days. Every time she brought him to mind, in fact, her heart fluttering as though she was a lovesick teenager. He's settled into his new place and the job is going well. It seems like ages since I've seen him, what with everything that's been going on here, but I'm looking forward to catching up with him at the weekend. We've got a walk and a pub lunch booked in on Saturday. Splendid. The two of you are so good together. It's as though you were always meant to be. Tess gave a slight incline of her head and smiled. She liked the sentiment, but could it really be true? There had been an instant connection with Rob, but she was sensible enough to know that sparks could flare, shine brightly, and then fizzle out when the moment was over. Only their affinity had developed into a much deeper friendship during the time he was living at the annex. When he'd left to move into his own property, she'd felt his absence keenly and worried when she didn't hear from him in the following weeks that they might lose contact completely, that he hadn't valued their friendship in the same way as she had. She was surprised when he turned up a few weeks later, admitting he had taken some time away to evaluate his feelings, realizing how much she had come to mean to him. It was a relief to Tess to discover that Rob's feelings matched her own, and they were able to voice those thoughts to each other. It was still early days, both still bearing the bruises from their recent breakups, and she had no idea where this new and unexpected relationship might take them. She didn't like to dwell on it, or to ask too many searching questions. Instead, after all the drama of the past few months, she was content to live in the moment and let her future play out naturally. Who knew where that might take her? Chapter 2. After a morning helping out at the local community library in the Lower Leaping Village Hall, a twice-weekly stint for Tess, she returned home, where she'd been pottering about in the kitchen since, preparing an apricot and raspberry flan for supper. She'd made herself a mug of tea, which she intended to drink in the garden, when she spotted an unfamiliar car pull onto the driveway. A red, sleek, sporty number that she didn't recognise as belonging to anyone she knew. She went to peer closer out of the window and exhaled a weary sigh. Of course, who else? Despite telling her ex, Charles, repeatedly that Hollyhocks Cottage was no longer his home and that he should call to ask if he needed to pop around for whatever reason, he took absolutely no notice and turned up exactly when he wanted to, as though he still lived there. "Charles," she said, when she opened the front door, about to rebuke him. He held up his palms in a gesture of self-defense. "I know, I should have called first, but I was literally driving past the door and honestly," he said, an apologetic smile spreading on his lips, "the new car is great, but it has a mind of its own. It was turning into the lane before I knew what was happening." Tess gave an indulgent shake of her head, holding the door open to let him in. Enough time had passed since Charles had delivered the bombshell that he was leaving her that she no longer felt driven by a burning anger and a desire to inflict personal injury upon him. Now she simply experienced an overwhelming wave of weariness and irritation in his presence. "Really, Charles? Are you sure you can afford that?" she said, gesturing to the Porsche outside. "Oh, don't be like that, darling. You know that our financial settlement will see you very comfortable. You get to keep this beautiful home," he said, lifting his hands to the sky, his gaze travelling around the old oak beams of the country kitchen. "Do you remember we always used to call it our forever cottage?" "Well, that was a misnomer, if ever there was one." "Come on, let's not bicker," he said, glancing at her mug. "Let's have a coffee together. You know, it's those little things I miss so much. Having the chance to catch up over a cuppa. There's nothing wrong with it, is there? Anyway, is Hannah not here?" He pulled out a stool at the island and made himself comfortable. Tess took a sip from her mug of tea before flicking the kettle on and making Charles a cup of instant coffee under duress. Only special guests warranted the freshly brewed coffee from the machine. "She's at work. Gina is keeping her busy, which is probably a good thing." "Doing what exactly?" Tess was hugely grateful to one of her oldest friends, Gina Moore, who had stepped up and offered Hannah a job working for her fashion accessories business when it became clear that Hannah wouldn't be taking up her place at university. Working from Gina's barn conversion at the other end of the village, Hannah had thrown herself into the role, enjoying being part of the small, thriving company and taking on the job of establishing a social media presence for the brand. Gina had many ideas for expansion, intending to take her company from a one-man band, selling her imported Italian goods to independent shops and outlets, to setting up her own retail events through upmarket fairs and pop-up shops. Hannah was providing the extra pair of hands Gina needed to forge ahead with her plans. "Well, that might be all well and good for a few days, but it's not a long-term proposition, is it? I still can't see why she couldn't have picked up her teacher training course as originally planned." "Because she had already deferred it for a year," said Tess, exasperated, "when she decided to keep the baby." Both she and Hannah had kept Charles informed about her plans at every step along the way. Why he was finding it so difficult to comprehend, she didn't know, although she suspected he was being deliberately obtuse. Besides, I'm not sure she'd be in the right headspace for uni now. She's been through a lot. A year's break will be good for her. For Christ's sake, she's only just come back from a jaunt across the other side of the world. How much time off does she need? She's not a child anymore. Exactly. Our daughter is an adult, old enough to make her own decisions. We have to respect that. Charles shook his head, his lips puffing out indignantly. Honestly, it's a good job I never got to meet that so-called boyfriend of hers. What a waste of space he sounds. And I wouldn't have had any problem in telling him so. Finding out she's pregnant, then doing a runner, leaving Hannah in the lurch like that. It's a despicable way to behave. I know, I agree, but it's happened now. I suspect Billy would have seen it as a holiday romance, something to last the length of the time they were travelling together. But Hannah fell head over heels in love. It happens, she said, pointedly, fixing him with a glare. It wasn't lost on Tess, the hypocrisy of Charles's outrage. Hadn't he been struck with a similar coup de foudre when he'd met and fallen in love with Melody? Yes, but to think about bringing a baby into the world in those circumstances, it shows a complete lack of judgment and sense on both their parts, especially our daughter. They didn't think about it, Charles. It wasn't planned. It happened, like these things have a habit of doing. Anyway, it's not a problem any longer, Tess said, with an edge of sadness to her voice. Hannah is trying to put the whole episode behind her. We should do the same. Hannah's backpacking adventure in Australia was intended as a well-deserved break after finishing her first degree and before starting her teacher training at Birmingham University, a chance to step outside her comfort zone, discover her independence, and explore the world. She had done exactly that, and her weekly WhatsApp calls to her mum, where, tanned and bright-eyed, she'd gleefully recount her latest exploits, had gone some way to reassuring Tess that her daughter was safe and well. When Hannah had met Billy, her happiness had been palpable from all those miles across the ocean. But sadly, it was only short-lived. Unexpectedly, Hannah had fallen pregnant. Billy had made a hasty retreat, and Hannah had returned home early, dejected, unhappy, and wondering how she was going to face the future. It had been a shock to everyone concerned, and Hannah had some deep soul-searching to do before she hastily rearranged her plans to take up her place on her teacher training course, deferring it for a year. Shortly after making that decision, in the early hours of a Saturday morning, she woke with crampy pains and miscarried. I wonder if it was my fault, she'd reflected with her mum afterwards, her eyes red with tears. All those things I said about not wanting the pregnancy. It's as though I put the thought out there in the universe, and the universe listened to me. What's that saying? Be careful what you wish for? You mustn't think like that. Tess pulled Hannah towards her in a hug, wrapping her arms tightly around her daughter. It's nothing you've done or anything you've said. Unfortunately, it's an all too common occurrence in early pregnancy. It happens to so many women. You mustn't blame yourself. It had been a stressful time for Hannah and a sobering experience for them all. Tess, Charles, Hannah and her grandmother Marjorie eliciting a whole gamut of emotions. From the initial shock at discovering the news, followed by acceptance and positivity at Hannah's new reality, before those emotions were quickly deflated when the pregnancy came to an abrupt and sad end. Charles, living away from the family home, had struggled to know how to reach Hannah, who had once been a daddy's girl, but since her travels to Australia, and, more pertinently, since her parents split, she had distanced herself from her father, blaming him for breaking up the family unit, their previous close bond now in tatters. It just worries me that she's throwing away everything that she's worked so hard for, Charles said now. You know that it's been her dream since she was a little girl to become a teacher, and just when she was on the cusp of making that a reality, it all falls to pieces around her. It's a setback, but not the end of her dream. Hannah will pick up her course next year, and who knows what's in store for her in the coming year. Exactly, that's what I'm worried about. She's easily led, that much has become apparent, and I'm not sure spending a year working for Gina is the best use of her time. Lord knows what fanciful ideas she'll pick up there. Tess made no attempt to disguise the roll of her eyes. Charles had never been Gina's biggest fan. It's good work experience for her. She's gaining skills and earning money. And it's just down the road. To me, it seems like the perfect way to spend her time. Charles shook his head, his jowls wobbling, and Tess had to suppress a smile. For all the years they were happily married, She'd hardly noticed his mannerisms and foibles. Now she saw them all the time. Had she been so in love with her husband that she'd failed to see his faults? Or had they taken each other so much for granted that they'd completely lost sight of who the other person really was? Does she realise that I am on her side, that I'm here for her? I miss her. She doesn't want to talk to me these days. I'd like for her to come and spend some time with me and Melody, but she isn't interested. She's had a lot going on. She's probably not in the right headspace to meet your new girlfriend right now. Tess's eyebrows lifted involuntarily. You need to be patient with her. She's stepping out into the world, and perhaps she doesn't need us in the same way as she might once have done. That has to be a good thing, doesn't it? Not if it means I'm going to lose her. I feel as though she's slipping away from me. Tess could hear the anguish in his voice. We used to be so close, but now there's this big gap between us. She resents me for leaving you, for leaving all this behind. There was a note of wistfulness to his voice as his gaze travelled around the kitchen before he ran a hand through his greying locks. He lifted his head to look at her. You know, sometimes I wonder if I didn't make the biggest mistake of my life. Well, it's far too late to be having thoughts like that, she snapped, before giving a careless shrug. I hate to say it, she said, quietly relishing the moment, but you've made your bed, you now have to make it as comfortable as you possibly can. I'm trying to do that, but it isn't easy. It feels like I'm losing you both, everything we had here. That's generally what happens when you walk away from a marriage, Charles. You can't really expect to have a foot in both camps, can you? Although judging by his expression and some of his recent musings, Tess could believe that was exactly what he wanted. I don't know what I expected, but I'm not certain it was this. He pressed on his lips, observing her thoughtfully. Can I ask a favour of you? Can you talk to Hannah for me, please? Tell her how much I love her, how I'm always here for her, that I would do anything to help her. I've told her myself, but I think if it came from you, she might actually take note. Tess swallowed a sigh. Despite her earlier murderous intentions towards Charles, she had already spoken to Hannah about her dad, trying to remain dispassionate about the situation, urging her not to let her anger towards him spoil what had previously been a very special relationship. The last thing Tess wanted was for Hannah and Charles to grow apart, for them to create a crack in their relationship that couldn't be mended. She lifted her gaze to look at him, feeling a pang of sadness that they found themselves in this situation. They had been married for over 30 years. It was only natural that she would have some residual feelings for him, but something she'd learned in recent months was that she couldn't be held responsible for other people's happiness. For too many years, she'd taken it upon herself to do everything she could to make everyone else's life easier, to take away their stress and to take on the burden of their emotions, often at the expense of her own needs and happiness. She felt some empathy for Charles, but it wasn't down to her to sort out his relationship issues with his daughter. It was something he had to do for himself. Look, Charles, you know what Hannah's like. Anything you have to say to her is much better coming from you. Why don't you suggest going out for dinner, just the two of you? Try and get your relationship back on track before introducing her to Melody. I suspect Hannah needs some time. Treat her with kindness and patience, and I'm sure you'll be able to work it out between you. If they didn't, then that would be sad, but Tess could do no more. She'd been an emotional support to Charles for years. Now it was Melody's turn to pick up that role. Chapter 3. Hey, how are you? Hearing Rob's richly warm voice at the end of the telephone was always a highlight of her day. It made Tess smile, and immediately took her out of her own head and into that hallowed place that existed only between the two of them. Good, she said, elongating the word, imagining Rob smiling at the way her face lit up. She folded the crochet project that she was working on, a small blanket in shades of pink and green, intended to drape over the back of the daybed in the annex, into her tote bag and put it to one side. She tucked up her legs next to her on the sofa and nestled into the cushions, wanting to give her full attention to Rob, Although Barney, of course, muscled in on the action and slipped into the space behind Tess's curled-up legs, making himself comfy. "Excellent. And how's Hannah doing?" he asked, interestedly. "A lot better. She's throwing herself into work, which is a good thing, and we're spending lots of time together, talking, eating, laughing, crying, making up for the lost time when she was away. It's been good for both of us." Rob, on hearing about Hannah's recent troubles, had been keeping a low profile, not turning up at Hollyhocks uninvited, not wanting to put too many demands on Tess or to intrude on their mother-daughter time, which he knew was so important right now. "Oh, guess who turned up here today in a brand new Porsche?" "Not Charles." "Yes, talk about his midlife crisis. I'm wondering what will come next. He's struggling with how to handle this situation with Hannah." Tess went on to explain about her conversation with Charles, how he was looking to her for guidance, and how he appeared like a lost soul at times. "You have the patience of a saint, Tess." She appreciated how Rob was so understanding, how he didn't feel threatened by Charles's continued presence in her life. Rob was always there with a kind and listening ear. It's so lovely to hear your voice," she sighed. "I miss you." "Not as much as I'm missing you, though," he said, which was his standard response that always squeezed at her heart and which she would conjure up in those moments when she noted his absence the most. She was doing exactly that when she sat at the oak table for supper that night, along with Hannah. Most evenings they would sit on the sofa in the orangery or in the snug with a bowl on their laps to eat their dinners, but on other occasions Tess liked to make an effort. Tonight she'd prepared a simple pasta dish of tagliatelle with garlic, pesto and cherry tomatoes, accompanied by a liberal sprinkling of black pepper and Parmesan cheese. She'd also prepared a green side salad and made some easy bread rolls, which, fresh from the oven, were filling the kitchen with an irresistible smell. She'd laid the table with a cream linen tablecloth, placed a small glass vase of dahlias, picked from the garden, in the centre, and lit a candle, creating a warm and welcoming ambience. It was one of the many things Tess had missed when Hannah was away on her travels, the coming together at the end of the day over some good food and a glass of wine to chat about their respective days. She noticed it especially so once Charles had left and she was alone in the house without the routines that had given structure and purpose to her days. The whole of this year had been about adapting to enforced changes. First, waving Hannah off abroad for 6 months, the longest she'd ever been away from home. Then Charles announcing he was leaving, and Tess having to adapt to a new way of life on her own at Hollyhocks Cottage. Through tears and regrets, Tess had made it her mission to face each day as best she could, simply going through the motions until she could actually see a way out of the fog that had descended over her world. Just as she was beginning to adjust to being on her own, Hannah had arrived back from Australia with her own problems, intending to stay. Not that Tess minded in the slightest. She was at her happiest when she had her family around the dining table. "Your dad was round here today," Tess said, bringing herself back to the moment. "Oh, has he forgotten again that he doesn't live here anymore?" I said pretty much the same thing. Tess gave a wry smile. "No, he thought you might be at home. He wanted to see how you were doing, if there was anything he could do to help. He does love you, you know." "Huh?" Hannah grunted, helping herself to a roll and pulling it apart between her fingers. She reached for the butter dish and dipped the knife in, spreading it thickly over the bread before taking a decisive bite. "Well, he has a funny way of showing it. I don't want to have to schedule time to spend with my dad. It isn't natural. And it means I have to see Melody as well, which I have no desire to do," she said airily. "Besides, I know he doesn't approve of my recent life choices. Although, to be fair, I don't approve of his." She gave a nonchalant shrug and tore off another chunk of bread, chomping on it enthusiastically. Tess received the message loud and clear. That particular topic of conversation was well and truly over. "How's work?" Tess asked, trying a different tack. "I'm loving it," she said, her face lighting up. "Gina is giving me the creative freedom to set up a social media presence, which she's not really had up until now. Already, we're seeing a positive response to the posts and reels, and it's great that Gina trusts me to come up with the content. It's given me something to focus on, and the best thing is that I can go into work and forget about everything else that has been going on. That's brilliant, but don't feel you have to put a brave face on. You are allowed to be sad, you know." "No, I'm not." She lifted her gaze from her bowl of pasta to look at her mum. "Honestly, I would never have wished for any of that stuff to happen, but it did, and now, well, it's like it happened to someone else. The worst thing is dealing with everyone else's pity, seeing that look in their eyes, as though I might break down into tears at any moment. Drives me mad. Honestly, I'm ready to move on. I wish everyone else was too." "Give it time," said Tess with a kindly smile. "It will be old news very soon, and everyone will find something else to gossip about. I'm just glad you're here and we get to spend this time together." She reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand tight. Tess was aware of the days and weeks ticking by, how everything could change in an instant, so she took nothing for granted. She wouldn't make that mistake again. "I guess," Hannah gave a wry smile. "It's been a mad year, though, for both of us, hasn't it? I worried about you so much while I was away, when I discovered what Dad had done. I hated the idea of you being on your own." "I would have thought the same thing too, before it happened. But it's funny how you quickly adjust to a new situation. Not that I had any choice in the matter. I just had to get on with it. That was the reason I tried to keep as much from you as possible. I didn't want you worrying about what was going on at home when you were supposed to be having the time of your life in Australia." "Well, I did have the time of my life, despite everything that happened here and over there. I met some amazing people and made memories that will last me a lifetime. All that other stuff, the not-so-good stuff, well, I'm not going to dwell on that." "Exactly. It's the only way," Tess said decisively, pleased that Hannah was adopting such a positive attitude. They were both on the cusp of exciting new phases in their respective lives. The past might have shaped them, but it didn't have to define their futures. She lifted the bottle of white wine from the cooler and topped up their glasses, listening attentively as Hannah chatted away about her day and her plans for the weekend. Just hearing her sing-song voice and seeing the smile on her face reassured Tess that everything would be okay. Hannah was strong and determined and would overcome her recent setbacks. After finishing their meal, Tess went to collect the fruit tart, serving up slices with a dollop of mascarpone on the side. Hannah dug in heartily, sucked on her lips, and closed her eyes in an expression of delight. "Honestly, this is delicious, but I dread to think what it's doing to my waistline. I should probably start going to the gym now that I'm not doing so much walking." Hannah finished her last mouthful and put down her spoon. "Still, I'm not complaining. I missed your amazing cooking when I was away, and being looked after, I suppose," she said with a sheepish grin. "And I missed not having someone to cook for. If I'm on my own, I might make do with a sandwich or a jacket potato, so it's nice to have a reason to cook a proper meal." Although, what surprised Tess was how she appreciated the spontaneity of her life these days, and whether she was catering for just herself, feeding the two of them, entertaining a group of her friends over a casual supper, or preparing a romantic dinner for Rob, she was relishing each moment, making the most of the opportunities as they presented themselves. She certainly didn't miss cooking for Charles night in, night out, realizing what a rut they'd carved out for themselves. Hannah stretched her arms high above her head. "I'm so tired. Working for a living is exhausting," she said, with an exaggerated roll of her eyes. "I might take a long leisurely soak in the bath, paint my toenails, and then have an early night. Do you mind? I'll help you with these dirty plates first, though." Hannah stood up and started clearing the table. "Of course I don't mind. You go up, darling. I'm perfectly happy to do this." "Are you sure?" Hannah asked, her face lighting up in relief at the suggestion, making Tess laugh. "Absolutely. Go and unwind. Have a good night's sleep, and I'll see you in the morning." With Barney padding alongside her, ever hopeful that he might be first in line for any leftovers, Tess wandered out to the kitchen with the used plates and popped them into the dishwasher before running a cloth over the worktops. She switched on the kettle and made herself a mug of tea before wandering out to the orangery, where she usually found herself at the end of the day, nestled in the wicker chair, enjoying the peace and solitude, looking out over the garden, which took on a magical quality at night. The shapes and forms of the shrubs and flowers were accentuated in the soft glow from the solar lights, and if she ventured outside with Barney, the fragrances from the flowers wafted in the still night air. Tonight, though, she was keen to get back to her latest book, an absorbing crime thriller that had transported her to the cobblestones of Prague's Old Town. She had only just opened her Kindle and had barely read the first sentence when she heard the doorbell ring. Reluctantly, she put her e-reader to one side. She wasn't expecting any visitors, so she wondered if it might be Dilly from next door, pushing away a vague hope that it could be Rob, knowing she would only end up disappointed when that idea was inevitably dashed. Any disappointment she might have been expecting was quickly replaced by a whole raft of other emotions when she saw who it was standing at her door. At first, she experienced a moment's incomprehension, seeing the young man who she vaguely recognized but couldn't quite place, but it took only a moment before realization dawned. It was the distinctive blonde hair that gave it away, as he stood there, hands behind his back, looking at her expectantly. The last time she'd seen him was on a video call when his hair had been longer and messier and he'd been rocking a surf dude vibe. Now his hair was shorter, accentuating the cut of his jawline and a set of compelling brown eyes. Any lingering doubt she may have had about who it was quickly dispelled as soon as he opened his mouth. "Hello, Mrs. Alexander. I'm Billy. I'm pleased to meet you at last." These words were delivered with a disarming smile and a soft Irish accent. "I was hoping that Hannah would be here." Tess felt wrong-footed. She was immediately taken by Billy's easy charm, as she had been on those video calls when they'd chatted briefly before, but quickly she remembered how this young man had broken her daughter's heart and immediately felt defensive. What was he doing here now? What could he possibly want? "Was Hannah expecting you?" Tess asked, already knowing the answer to that question. Hannah would most definitely have mentioned an upcoming visit from her ex, but it gave her at least a bit of thinking time. "No, I thought I'd surprise her," he said with a quirk of his mouth, having the good grace to look apologetic. "You'll certainly do that," she said coolly. "Look, I'm not entirely sure Hannah is available right now. I would need to go and check. Can you wait a few minutes?" "Sure," he said. "I can wait as long as it takes." He didn't look in the least bit put out when she indicated for him to take a seat on the stone bench at the front of the house. It went against her instinct to be so rude, but she wouldn't invite Billy inside the doors of Hollyhocks Cottage, not until Hannah had given her say-so. At least it was a warm evening out there. "I'll be right back," said Tess, closing the door on him, feeling a sense of dread at how Hannah might react. She'd only just got back on an even keel after losing the baby, and now Billy was back to bring all those memories to the fore. Perhaps Tess should have immediately closed the door on him, told him he wasn't welcome around here. It was exactly what Charles would have done, although not before tearing Billy off a strip and sending him on his way. But then, as she kept telling everyone, Hannah was an adult, more than capable of making her own choices and decisions. "Hannah?" she called as she climbed the stairs. And immediately her daughter appeared from her bedroom, no doubt alerted by the tone of Tess's voice. In her kitten-print pyjamas, her face devoid of makeup and her hair tied back in a ponytail, she looked younger than her 22 years. "There's someone here to see you." "It's Billy?" "Billy? What? You mean my Billy?" The confusion and disbelief on Hannah's face was clear to see. "Yes, listen." Tess grabbed hold of Hannah's forearms. "You don't have to see him. Not if you don't want to. I'm more than happy to go down there and tell him you don't want to speak to him." "No, absolutely not," she said, rolling her shoulders backwards, a resolve appearing in her eyes. "This will be interesting. Let me go and see what he has to say for himself." Tess gave a tight smile and stood back, allowing Hannah to walk past her down the stairs. Tess followed, a sense of dread building in her chest, knowing that her quiet evening in the orangery with a good book would now need to wait until another day. Chapter 4. "What are you doing here, Billy?" Hannah had rescued him from outside, where he produced a bunch of flowers from behind his back and presented them with a sheepish smile. Hannah looked at them for a moment, uncomprehending, before accepting them, unsure what to do with the bouquet. She invited him inside, where they settled in the kitchen, and Hannah dumped the flowers in the sink. She would deal with them later. Billy accepted Hannah's offer of a glass of water, and he took a hearty glug before sitting on the high stool indicated by a nod of the head from Hannah. Her gaze darted around the kitchen, all around Billy, unwilling to make direct eye contact, but simply being in the same room as him evoked all kinds of emotions within her. "How did you even know where to find me?" "Well, you talked about lower leaping a lot when we were together, so I looked it up on the map. It wasn't difficult to find. When I arrived, I went into the pub and asked if they knew where you lived, and they sent me straight here." It didn't surprise Tess. Everyone knew everyone else in the village, so you could never hide yourself away, even if you wanted to. "So, you're here now? What was it you wanted to say?" Hannah stood with her arms folded, her tone distinctly cool. "It would have been easier to text or call me." "Well, I would have done, had you not blocked my number." His gaze locked onto hers, and his mouth lifted to one side. "I did think about sending you a letter, but I reckoned I could get here just as quickly myself, and what I wanted to say to you and your mum is much better delivered in person." Tess, who had been thinking that she should make herself scarce and leave the pair of them to talk, caught Hannah's sideways glance and realised that she had no option but to stay. "Look, I wanted to say how sorry I was for bailing out on you. I regretted it almost as soon as I walked away, but I was in a state of shock. I know that it was probably nothing compared to what you were going through, but I panicked and just had this overwhelming feeling to run, to get away from the situation." Billy dropped his gaze to his hands, clasped together on the table. "It wasn't my finest hour." "No, it really wasn't, but thank you for the apology. You really didn't need to come all the way here for that." "Oh, but I did. Don't you see? I've missed you. Didn't we have the best time together in Oz? It's been driving me crazy not being..."